Hi, I'm Aelith. At my father's retirement party, my sister called me a maid, in front of everyone. And when they all laughed, her fiancé turned to me and said, "Hi back, boss." They didn't expect me to show up. Not after years of silence, of being erased from every family photo, every speech, every thank you. But I did. I sat by the kitchen. I wasn't on the guest list. They whispered that I'd lost my career, that I didn't belong anymore. But what happens when the one they tried to silence brings the only truth they can't edit? And what do you do when the applause starts echoing the wrong way? The envelope looked expensive. Too expensive for someone who hadn't called me in 3 years. Heavy cardstock, gilded edges, embossed crest of the Hartman family. The kind of invitation that was designed to impress someone who still cared. I didn't. But I opened it anyway. The handwriting inside wasn't my father's. It wasn't Isolde's either. It was computer-printed, sterile, impersonal. "You are cordially invited to the retirement celebration of Vernon J. Hartman." No dear Aelith, no greeting, no acknowledgement, just my name, misspelled, and a +1. In my family, even an omission has meaning. I held the card under the kitchen light, watching the gold foil catch a flicker from the bulb overhead. There was a time I would have mistaken this for a peace offering, but not anymore. I knew my father didn't do anything halfway. If he wanted me there, he would have called. This was formality. A checkbox. For 3 nights, I left it on the counter. Just close enough to see, far enough not to touch. On the 4th, I poured a glass of Malbec, stared at it for too long, and muttered out loud, "Why now?" I already knew the answer. This wasn't about me. It was about them. About the optics of inclusion. About pretending the cracks in our family wall didn't run all the way through. But silence isn't peace. It's just an unfinished war. So, I RSVP'd. Not because I wanted to reconnect, not to forgive. I did it because I refused to let them tell my story without me. They had tried erasing me before. This time, I'd write myself in. Charlotte in the Fall has a strange kind of warmth, like it hasn't decided yet if it wants to be Southern cozy or city cool. The club they chose sat just outside town, hidden behind rows of manicured hedges and the kind of gates that buzz before they open. When I pulled up, the valet looked young, early 20s maybe. His Southern accent tried too hard to be polite. "Name, ma'am?" "Aelith Hartman." He squinted at his clipboard. "Could you spell that for me?" I did, slowly, clearly. After a moment, he looked up, sheepish. "Sorry, ma'am, you're not on the list." Of course I wasn't. "This wasn't a mistake," I said under my breath. "It was a message." The boy picked up the radio, whispered something about a guest mix-up. After a too long pause, someone crackled back. "Let her through." He offered a shallow smile. "Apologies, you're all set." I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance, heels quiet against the brick. I didn't wait for anyone to greet me. No one was coming. Inside, the room glowed with chandeliers that probably cost more than my law school debt. I scanned the crowd. Laughter floated above the clink of cutlery. A jazz quartet played something too polite to be memorable. No one looked up. I walked past portraits lining the hallway. Vernon in his younger days. Vernon shaking hands with local politicians. Vernon breaking ground on his first development project. And then came the family portraits. There was Isolde, at 10, at 21, at her medical award banquet, at some benefit gala in New York. I wasn't in any of them. I stopped in front of one, an old holiday picture I remembered being part of. But there, between Isolde and our father, was a Christmas tree. Not me. They had replaced me with a pine. Being invisible hurts more than being hated. I moved to the main room. A server smiled, genuinely. She offered me a flute of champagne. I declined. "Water?" she offered. I nodded. "Please." The first words of kindness I heard that evening came from someone paid to be there. She led me to my seat, table 9, back corner, close to the swinging kitchen doors. I sat down, glanced at the napkin, No name card, just a folded white square. Disposable. When I was 10, I'd been told to help in the kitchen while Isolde welcomed guests with our mother. I passed hors d'oeuvres that night, while she got applause for a piano recital I never got invited to. And here I was again, closer to the waitstaff than to my own bloodline. Funny how some roles stick. The tablecloth rustled slightly from the breeze every time the kitchen doors swung open. I looked across the room. There they were, Isolde in a fitted burgundy dress, her arm linked with Dad's, laughing with someone from the city council. My mother beside them, all pearls and posture. They didn't look over, not once. I sipped my water. The metal chair dug into my spine. Even the chairs knew where I stood in this family. But what they didn't know was that I hadn't come to stay seated. I stepped deeper into the ballroom, careful not to trip over anyone's expectations. My heels touched the polished floor like apologies, soft, practiced. Every few steps, I felt eyes flick toward me, then veer off, as if direct acknowledgement might spread something contagious. That's the thing about shame. When it's projected onto you long enough, others learn to avoid eye contact like it's a reflex. If shame had a sound, it was the silence that swallowed my name that night. A woman in a black dress suit with a clipboard approached me, someone from the venue, not family. She greeted me by title, Judge Hartman, and smiled politely. I nodded. Her eyes didn't flinch. She was just doing her job, no history attached. This way, ma'am. She led me past 3 round tables, then another. I counted them, like pacing through a maze I didn't know I was part of. Finally, she gestured to a small table, partially hidden by a column near the swinging kitchen doors. Table 9. No seat tag, just a plain napkin, folded once. The chair's leg wobbled when I pulled it back. A faint stain marked the upholstery. From here, I had a perfect view of servers coming in and out with trays, of dishware clattering behind swinging doors, of the main table glowing beneath the chandelier. Isolde sat at the center, dress fitted like armor, posture perfect. Silas beside her, smiling as if he'd never seen the edges of the world fall apart. I wasn't part of the celebration. I was furniture for symmetry. I stayed seated, hands in my lap. From my corner, I watched the room like a ghost pressed against glass. People passed by with animated conversations, tossing glances around me. Not at me. Never at me. I could have stood up and clinked a glass with a fork, and they would have thought it was a server signaling dessert. At another gathering, years ago, I was 13. My aunt had asked me to refill wine glasses, because you're so good with a tray, sweetheart. That night, Isolde had performed a piano piece. She received a standing ovation. I had wiped fingerprints off champagne flutes. I remembered a line my mentor once told me after a particularly brutal trial, when the judge had mispronounced my name for the 3rd time that morning. Some people will always try to rewrite your story to keep their version clean. She wasn't wrong, and I was done being their margin note. Behind me stretched a wall that reeked of legacy. Dozens of framed photos lined the paneling, Vernon shaking hands with senators, Isolde cutting ribbons at charity events, family portraits so carefully posed they looked AI-generated. I scanned each one slowly. Graduation shots, Isolde's debate victories, her at a white coat ceremony, another from a non-profit gala, with Dad beaming behind her. Every event a curated moment in her myth. I searched for mine. There wasn't a single one. You can be born into a family and still not exist in its history. I took a sip of water, lukewarm. The glass sweat against my fingers. My eyes drifted toward the exit, briefly, but I didn't move. I'd spent years convincing myself not to leave things undone. This would be no different. I asked myself the real question. Why had they invited me? Was it pity? Damage control? An afterthought dressed as inclusion? Then I knew. They hadn't invited me to celebrate. They invited me to sit down and stay silent, to prove they were kind enough to include me and that I was polite enough to accept my place, off-center, barely seen. When you're missing long enough, People stop wondering why. You become a story they replace. But I hadn't come to play their supporting role. I came to be seen. If not by them, then by truth. Across the ballroom, a man in a tuxedo clinked his glass with the back of a spoon. The jazz quartet softened to a hush. The buzz of conversation faded like a dimmer switch sliding down. A woman took the mic. The host smiled brightly. Please welcome the family's golden girl, Isolde Hartman, to give our opening toast. I felt the napkin in my lap crumple under the tension in my hand. My eyes locked on Isolde as she walked confidently toward the mic, her heels rhythmically announcing her presence like a courtroom entrance. This seat may have been picked to humble me, but I wasn't the one about to be exposed. When my sister speaks, she always makes sure the whole room hears her. Isolde stood beneath the chandelier like it was made for her alone. She smiled the way only someone raised to win applause could, bright, unshakable, practiced. The microphone fit in her hand like it had waited its whole life to be held just by her. I folded my napkin once, then again, steadying myself. No one at my table looked in my direction. No one ever did when she had the floor. Her voice floated over the room with the same crisp polish of a corporate keynote. I want to thank you all for being here to honor my father, a man who taught me what legacy really means. People nodded. Some beamed. One woman near the front dabbed at her eyes. Isolde walked the crowd through her curated timeline. How Vernon coached her debate team in high school, the way he read her college application essays out loud at the dinner table, how his lessons in discipline fueled her drive to start her nonprofit. She listed every accomplishment like an award reel. Awards she earned, yes, but never alone. And through it all, not a single mention of me. Not one. It wasn't that she forgot. It was that she wanted everyone else to. I stared at the water glass in front of me, tracing a slow circle with my finger along its rim. Each story she told carved me further out of existence, like I'd been airbrushed from the family photo before anyone noticed I'd even been in it. The room leaned in. She had them. And I drifted. My mind walked me back to 9th grade. I'd won a statewide essay contest. The prize was a reading at the Capitol and a scholarship check. I came home with a small plaque and a big smile. But no one had been in the crowd for me that day. Isolde had been getting her hair done for prom, and Dad said he couldn't take time off. Mom just forgot. That night, I ate dinner alone. I didn't bring up the award. The silence felt more manageable than explaining why it mattered. When you're invisible long enough, you begin to wonder if your story was ever yours. I looked up. Isolde's voice hadn't wavered once. She was still going, still painting the version of our family she wanted everyone to believe. She said things like, "Dad made me who I am," and "We Hartmans build from the inside out." People clapped after every pause. She used her voice like bleach, cleansing the story of anyone who didn't shine like she did. I scanned the room. Not one person flinched at the omission. It was seamless. They accepted the version they were given because it was prettier, easier, familiar. I took out my phone under the table, opened the Notes app, names, dates, documents. I started typing, not out of spite, not out of pain, out of something sharper. I wasn't going to counter Isolde's myth with noise. I'd bring receipts. This isn't her legacy, it's ours. And if I let her steal it, I become the silence too. Isolde held up her champagne flute. To my father, the man who raised a legacy worth continuing. The room rose in applause. Glasses clinked. Laughter returned like nothing had happened. I didn't raise my glass. I stared at the untouched drink, the condensation dripping onto a pristine napkin. Some toasts are meant to seal truth. Others are just poison in prettier glasses, and I wasn't going to swallow a drop more. As the last of the toasts fizzled into clinking glasses and small talk, the energy in the ballroom shifted. People drifted into clusters. Laughter resurfaced like a tide rolling back in. I stood up from my seat, slow and deliberate, and made my way toward the bar. Not for champagne, but for something colder. The eyes followed, not admiring, assessing. They watched the way you'd watch a guest who wasn't quite supposed to be there, but showed up anyway. I could feel the air thicken with polite discomfort as I walked, my heels a whisper beneath the jazz. That undercurrent of judgment wasn't new. What stung was the casualness of it, as if it were simply expected that I'd shrink again. I passed Vernon before I reached the bar. He was seated with a small group of men in suits, one of them a local donor I vaguely recognized from newspaper columns. They were sipping aged scotch, chuckling in low tones. Vernon didn't see me until he did. He met my eyes for the briefest second, then turned his gaze to the cuff of his sleeve, smoothing the fabric as if he'd found lint. No nod, no smirk, nothing. Just dismissal, neatly tailored and well-rehearsed. I paused, half-turned, waiting, hoping, maybe, but he resumed speaking without so much as a stutter. I stood there long enough to register the chill. Some fathers build legacies, others build walls. The bartender, to his credit, didn't hesitate when I asked for water with lemon. It arrived swiftly, with a napkin folded beside the glass. I sipped, trying not to let my jaw clench. Then my phone buzzed. I knew it was her before I even looked. Marlene. Please don't escalate anything. This night means a lot to your father. Isolde is under a lot of pressure. I blinked once, twice. The words stared back at me like a rebuke wrapped in concern. I could practically hear her voice in that message. Tight, gentle, always asking me to be the one to bend first. Understand her? She's dismantling me in real time. I didn't answer. I slid the phone back into my clutch and took another sip of water. It tasted more bitter than it should have. I've always been the one told to hold peace like it's my job. At every family gathering, I played mediator, the translator, the softener of blows. I took pride in being reasonable, even when it felt like swallowing glass. But here's what no one tells you about being the peacemaker. You bleed the most, quietly, and everyone assumes you're fine because you're not screaming. If the house is burning, they expect us to fan the flames gently, not scream fire. That night, I decided I'd let it burn. At the bar, a woman I hadn't seen in years stepped beside me. I remembered her vaguely, a cousin's friend from law school maybe. She looked surprised to see me. "You've been gone a while," she said mildly. I nodded, offering nothing. She glanced toward the center table. "Isolde's done so much. It's really amazing." I smiled, not warmly. "Yes, it's impressive how she's repackaged my work." She froze, blinking once. The silence that followed was exquisite. I didn't fill it. It wasn't a shout, but it was the first time I'd ever raised my voice in public. I turned, glass still in hand, and walked slowly back toward table 9. The music had shifted again, softer now, like the band sensed the tension in the room and decided to retreat into background noise. As I neared my seat, a young server approached me, face flushed from the bustle of movement. "Excuse me, Miss Hartman," he whispered, leaning in. "Your sister asked if you'd mind helping pass the champagne trays for her toast. Said you were always great with guests." I stopped cold. The tray in his hands trembled slightly. He wasn't part of the game, just the messenger. But the sting landed all the same. This wasn't an accident. It was an announcement. And she wanted witnesses. I turned slowly, not toward the trays, but toward the truth. The server still stood there, tray in hand, face blank. I gave him a small nod, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. He wasn't the one who deserved the weight of that moment. I returned to my seat, my back a little straighter, my expression carefully unreadable. From across the room, I heard a man chuckle and say, "That slideshow, just beautiful. Tell Isolde it nearly made me cry." My stomach twisted. I turned my head slightly. Vernon was shaking hands, nodding. His voice, calm as always, said, "Yes, she worked hard on it." The screen behind him flickered with the final still of the video. Photos from Dad's early development projects, childhood birthday parties, award ceremonies. Then a closing slide. To Vernon Hartman, builder of legacies, from Isolde, your forever girl. I blinked once, hard. That slideshow had taken me 8 evenings, 3 glasses of wine, and every ounce of restraint I had left. I had pulled photos from a box buried in Mom's garage, scanned them, color-corrected every faded memory. I'd chosen the jazz track, Dad's favorite Coltrane piece, myself. I had emailed it to Mom with a message that read, "If he plays this, it'll mean something to both of us." She never replied. She used my hand, I whispered under my breath, and signed her name. A woman next to me leaned over and smiled. Isolde really has an eye for presentation. I looked at her, not angry, just awake. "Yes," I said evenly, "especially when she borrows someone else's lens." Her smile faltered. She blinked, then chuckled like she hadn't quite caught the point. But she had. They always do, eventually. I wasn't trying to humiliate my sister. I was trying not to vanish entirely. Memories snapped back like a rubber band. I saw myself hunched over the dining table, sorting Polaroids, rubbing smudges off the glossy ones with the hem of my sleeve. I remembered choosing the order, milestones first, candid laughs near the end. I remembered including the photo of Dad and me after I won my first pro bono case. He had his arm around me, uncharacteristically casual, proud. That photo never made it in. So I reached for a napkin. I wrote a single line. "You missed one slide," and I walked toward the AV table tucked behind a curtain near the DJ booth. The technician looked startled as I approached, eyes darting toward my name badge. Except there wasn't one. I handed him the napkin. "There's one more image," I said. "It belongs here." He hesitated, lips parting as if to ask for permission from someone else. I added, "You'll want the full story, I promise." He nodded, uncertain but curious. I walked away before I saw whether he followed through. A few minutes passed. Laughter rose again. Someone clinked a glass. I kept my eyes low. Then the screen blinked once, hesitated, and lit up with the final segment again. Except this time, after Isolde's dedication, another slide faded in. It was the photo, me, in a navy suit, Dad, with a hand on my shoulder. We were standing outside the courthouse, the late sun turning our hair gold. The caption below read, "Case won, truth served, family regardless." A hush blanketed the room. Vernon's face twitched. His lips parted slightly, his brows pulled inward, recognition blooming like a bruise. No applause. Just silence. I didn't need the cheers. Her smile faltered. Isolde's, I mean. It twitched at the corner like a painting with a crack too fine to notice until it split clean through. If she wanted the spotlight, she just invited the shadows, and I had no plans of staying in the dark anymore. As I made my way back to table 9, the room seemed louder than before, but the sound didn't reach me. All I could hear were murmurs flitting around like moths in expensive perfume. My name floated just below the music, mentioned casually, then forgotten just as fast. "She's here. I thought she didn't have a job anymore." The words slipped out from behind 2 women near the bar, one of them a former colleague of Isolde's, I remembered now. Their dresses sparkled, their wine was full, and their tone held that casual venom women sometimes aim with a smile. "That's what I heard," the other replied. "Left law or something? Couldn't handle the stress, maybe?" I turned my head just enough to make eye contact. They startled slightly, as if caught peeking through the wrong window. "I didn't leave," I said clearly. "I just stopped needing a spotlight to do the work." Their expressions froze. One gave a half nod and turned her glass in her hand. They didn't say another word. You don't lose your worth when someone lies about your resume. The music paused momentarily. Then came the rustle of movement, servers pushing through with trays of champagne, a shift in the lighting, and the unmistakable tapping of a microphone. Isolde was back on stage. "Before we continue," she said with that pageant smile so polished it could reflect light, Let's raise a glass for those who've always been there, the ones who help things run smoothly behind the scenes. She glanced over the crowd, then locked eyes with me. Someone grabbed the tray near the kitchen? Oh, wait, Aelith, since you're always so helpful. The room snapped still. No one laughed right away. It was a joke that didn't land, but not because they didn't understand it. They did. It was just too loud to be disguised as humor. I didn't flinch. I stood slowly and walked toward the nearest tray like I owned it. I picked up a flute, not rushing, not smiling. Then I turned to face her. Thanks for the suggestion, Isolde. I do serve people, but only when they ask with dignity. That silence. It was the kind that sticks to the walls, the kind that makes people uncomfortable enough to suddenly remember their own secrets. Isolde's smile tightened, but she didn't respond. She turned back to the mic and continued her toast, but the spotlight didn't quite follow her the same way. I walked back to my seat slowly, champagne glass in hand, a quiet hum building in my chest. Not pride, not rage, recognition. For as long as I could remember, I had been the helper, the one who set the chairs, carried the boxes, passed the plates. I was the girl in the background of every success photo, smiling just wide enough to look grateful, never wide enough to outshine. I once missed my own graduation dinner to help Isolde prep for a medical school interview she hadn't even asked me to attend. I've ironed her clothes, edited her speeches, picked up her dry cleaning the night before charity events, and never once did anyone say thank you. It wasn't expected. Kindness in this family wasn't a gift, it was a job, and I was hired at birth. Now I watched as they watched me. The same eyes that avoided me an hour ago now couldn't look away. I glanced up. Vernon was watching too. He hadn't moved, but something had shifted in his stare. It wasn't disappointment. It wasn't pride either. It was curiosity. For the first time, he looked unsure, and just human. It took a joke to make them look. I'd make sure they didn't look away again, and the first person to really see was the last I expected. After the moment with the champagne tray and Isolde's not-so-subtle jab, I didn't sit back down. I needed air, though not the kind outside. Just space away from the curated smiles and manufactured laughter. I moved quietly toward the edge of the ballroom, navigating between clusters of guests whose chatter barely dimmed as I passed. Near the dessert table, I caught a conversation mid-whisper. It wasn't loud, but loud enough. Didn't she almost lose her bar license? The speaker was a man I didn't recognize, though his voice carried the same tone of easy gossip that travels through country club halls. Another replied, "Yeah, something about emotional instability in court. Or maybe burnout? I don't know, it's always the ones who try too hard." I stopped behind a floral arrangement tall enough to cover me. They hadn't seen me, didn't care to. They spoke of me like I was tabloid fodder at brunch. I thought I'd handled enough trials to be immune to this. But no one prepares you for character assassination passed around like cocktail shrimp. Trying to stay composed, I walked out of the ballroom and into the west hallway. A quieter stretch lit by soft sconces and lined with photos. The wall was a shrine to Vernon Hartman's legacy. Black and white groundbreakings, charity fundraisers, ribbon cuttings. Mixed among them were family photos, carefully chosen, perfectly arranged. I slowed when I saw one from the Metropolitan Gala 5 years ago. I remembered that night vividly. I'd presented Vernon with a Civic Service Award. We shook hands on stage. A photographer caught the moment, and for the first time in ages, he'd placed his hand on my shoulder. It was one of the few nights I'd almost felt like I belonged. But in the framed version here, I wasn't in the photo. Not fully. The shot had been cropped, tightly. Vernon stood smiling, holding the plaque. Behind him was the podium, and beside him, just the edge of a blue sleeve. My sleeve. That was all that remained of me. Erased, but still haunting the edge of their curated truth. I stood in front of the photo, motionless. A couple walked past, glancing at it briefly before moving on, unaffected. I took a breath, deep and slow, and felt the weight in my chest rise, not as pain, but as clarity. They didn't just forget me. They chose to. My mind slipped back to that gala. I remembered how tightly my shoes pinched that night. I remembered how Vernon had smiled on stage, but hadn't said a word to me afterward. I'd left before dessert was served. Turns out I was just the placeholder before Photoshop took over. And yet, I stayed. I kept showing up, kept pretending maybe this year would be different. But what's the point of attending your own erasure? Why keep coming to these events if my story's already rewritten? Because I'm the only one left who remembers the truth. I took out my phone and without flash, snapped a photo of the altered picture. I opened my texts and sent it to Dana. They edited me out. I'm editing back in. No emojis, no explanation. She'd know exactly what I meant. I lingered a few more moments, watching the images on that wall flicker faintly under warm light. Each one carefully chosen, filtered, reframed. Each one an archive of who they wanted us to be, not who we really were. Then I turned and walked back toward the ballroom, not rushing. Halfway there, my phone vibrated. I checked the screen. Dana. You should see who's here. Ballroom corner, near the piano. I paused just outside the doorway and looked up. My eyes swept the room, scanning carefully. I thought I'd been pushed out of the picture. Turns out I was being framed for something bigger, and he was standing exactly where she didn't expect him to be. I followed Dana's text with a measured turn, scanning the far corner near the grand piano. And there he was, Silas, looking out of place in a room he technically belonged to. He stood apart from the chatter, untouched by the swirl of social pleasantries and false smiles. He was watching me, not Isolde. Our eyes met, and something in the air shifted. That moment didn't feel planned. It felt inevitable. He began walking toward me, not rushed, not hesitant. Each step landed with certainty. I watched Isolde notice him from across the room. Her posture straightened, her lips tightened, but she pasted a smile on for the audience, like she'd been taught. He didn't stop at her. He stopped in front of me. "Hi back, boss." The words sliced through the room like glass dropped on marble. The pause was immediate. A few gasps, a few confused glances. Someone choked slightly on their drink. Nervous laughter rippled, but no one quite knew where to land it. I didn't speak. I let it sit. Silas turned to the room, his voice calm, strong, nothing performative in its delivery. "When I nearly lost my license, one person stayed up emailing me case notes at 2 a.m. He didn't move, didn't gesture. She saved my career." The room had gone still. He didn't name me. He didn't need to. Respect doesn't always wear the right last name. Isolde's chuckle tried to arrive on time, but it came too late and too strained. She clutched her flute a bit too tight. "Oh, don't embarrass her," she said, laughter breaking awkwardly. I turned toward her, my expression unfazed. "Embarrassment requires shame. I don't carry that anymore." That landed. Guests shifted. You could hear the shuffle of shoes on carpet, the weight of realization rebalancing the room. And for once, I didn't feel small. I thought back to that night. Silas's voice cracking over the phone, his confidence shredded after a disastrous courtroom moment, his partners already distancing themselves. I was at home, half asleep, but I pulled up the case file. I rewrote parts of his argument. I sent case law. I risked my own reputation when I said he was worth the fight. I didn't save him to be remembered. I saved him because someone once did that for me. Silas gave a subtle nod and stepped back, letting the moment breathe. The pianist resumed quietly in the background, a cue missed by most, but followed anyway. I stood still, grounded. Across the room, Vernon hadn't moved, but he watched. He wasn't clapping, but he wasn't dismissing either. Then it started. A guest, someone from the university board, began clapping. Then another. Slowly, like they weren't sure it was allowed. But it grew. A real soft applause. Not for Isolde's curated version of events, Not for Vernon's stage-managed legacy. For truth. Finally visible. Isolde didn't move. She stood frozen, her glass suspended near her lips, her smile worn down to the corners. I didn't bow. I didn't wave. I didn't say thank you. I breathed in. They handed her the microphone, but I walked away with the echo. And now the silence wasn't mine to carry anymore. I returned to my seat without fanfare, the soft clapping behind me fading into a new kind of quiet. Not discomfort, not dismissal. Curiosity. The kind of silence that follows a shift in gravity, like everyone was waiting to see what might float or fall next. I barely touched my glass. The stem felt thin, fragile in my hand, as if one wrong breath would crack it. Then I heard her. Isolde, standing once more, this time without the microphone. She raised her glass with forced levity, her voice pitched too high, trembling under the weight of whatever she was trying to hold together. You know, she laughed lightly, it's amazing what a woman can do when she sleeps her way to a title. For a moment, time didn't just stop. It recoiled. No polite laugh followed. Not even the usual shuffle of feet or clink of cutlery. Someone in the back coughed, but that was all. I looked at her, directly, my face calm, unreadable. I didn't blink. If you're going to invent history, I said evenly, at least spell my name right in the credits. Someone at the far table choked softly on their drink. A few turned away, pretending they hadn't heard, but the ripple had already spread. Isolde's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing else. She sipped her champagne like it might hide her, but her hand shook just enough to betray her. I let it be. And then, like fate wanted one more twist of the knife, a small hand tugged at my sleeve. It was Grace, Isolde's daughter, my niece. She looked up at me, big brown eyes blinking. Mom said you used to be a lawyer, she said softly, but now you're just sad. I stared at her for half a beat. Then I knelt down, matching her height, my voice gentle but clear. I still am a lawyer, sweetie, and sadness doesn't last forever. Her face didn't change. Kids don't lie. They just echo what they're taught. Even the smallest echoes come from somewhere. As she wandered back toward her seat, I straightened slowly, suddenly aware of how long I'd been carrying the weight of words no one had ever said to my face. My mind drifted to the case that almost cost me everything. A public defender appeal, an underdog case, messy and politically dangerous. I worked it while juggling 3 court calendars. I lost sleep. I lost a client's trust for a week. I nearly lost my license. I never told anyone that case later reshaped housing policy for the state. They erased it because they didn't understand it. That's not my shame to carry. I was interrupted by movement at Vernon's table. A man, gray-haired, suit a shade too sharp, leaned in and said something to him. Vernon nodded once, slowly, his face unreadable. She's the one who wrote the brief that saved our nonprofit lawsuit, the man added louder, just enough for me to hear. Marlene stood nearby. Her expression for the first time wasn't controlled or polite. It was embarrassed. She looked down at her empty glass, her fingers fidgeting with the napkin. And Silas. He wasn't beside Isolde anymore. He was behind her. That spoke louder than applause ever could. Then a photographer with a camera too large for the room stepped forward. We're doing the Hartman family photo now. A few guests turned, repositioning for better angles. Isolde stood tall, brushing the front of her dress. Vernon hesitated. I didn't move. The photographer waved toward me, confused. Miss? Are you? I shook my head once. You can take it without me, I said, voice firm but not angry. I brought my own frame tonight. And I meant it, and I knew exactly who I wanted inside it. I made my way toward the piano where the folder sat quietly beneath the edge of the guest book. The staff member I'd spoken to earlier had placed it there, exactly as requested. Unobtrusive, understated, almost invisible, fitting. I picked it up, holding it lightly as I stepped into the center of the room. The conversations dulled just enough to notice the shift. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't tap a glass. I simply opened the folder. Inside, printed letters from judges, commendations from the state bar, feature clippings from legal journals and local press. All of it quiet evidence. Facts without flourish. Work that mattered. Because it helped people, not because it fit a narrative. I walked to the reception table, past Isolde's slideshow plaque, and placed the folder down beside it. Deliberate. No speech, no grandstanding. I didn't need applause. I brought receipts. As I stepped back, I saw the ripple begin. A former professor from law school approached Vernon, hands clasped behind his back. "She wrote the foundation brief your daughter's nonprofit uses," he said simply. Vernon didn't respond, just gave a subtle nod, as if the confirmation reached him somewhere deeper than his face would show. Another guest added, "Her housing reform ruling 2 years ago. It's the reason my sister's apartment wasn't condemned. They didn't look at me when they said it. They said it to each other. They said it to the room." And suddenly, the curated story started to shift. Isolde tried to laugh again. "She's just doing this for attention," she said with a shrug that aimed for casual and landed somewhere near panic. Someone near her answered, "No. She's reminding us where the attention should have gone." Vernon turned his face slightly. For once, there was no correction, no shield, just silence. It used to protect her. Now it was a verdict. I moved toward the edge of the room and checked my phone. Dana had sent 3 screenshots in a row, online threads already spreading, comments beneath a local nonprofit's photo from the night. "She's a force in our legal community. This family owes her more than flowers. They made the wrong woman invisible." I smiled, briefly. They tried to erase me, but paper remembers. I didn't need the warmth of applause. The clarity was better. As I glanced back, a man near the drinks table leaned toward Isolde. "Hey," he asked casually, "is it true you used your sister's legal filings in your grant proposal?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Vernon didn't wait. "We'll talk later," he muttered, already walking away. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. I walked past the last cluster of guests, head high. No one stopped me. No one smiled awkwardly or whispered as I passed. They didn't know what to say. That was enough. I stepped through the ballroom doors and into the hall. I didn't take the mic, but I ended the performance, and outside those doors, I started something that didn't need their stage. The air was cooler than I expected. It wrapped around me like an answer I didn't need to question. I stepped down the stone stairs, the sound of my heels tapping softly behind me, each one quieter than the last. The ballroom lights glowed behind the stained glass windows, laughter still filtering faintly through the walls. But it didn't touch me. Not anymore. I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking away done. A voice called behind me. "Ms. Hartman?" I turned, surprised. A young staff member, maybe 21 at most, jogged up, slightly out of breath, but not nervous. "I just wanted to say, thank you," they said, voice unsure but genuine. "Your ruling last year, the one on tenant protection, it kept my mom in our place when the building tried to evict everyone. She still cries talking about it." I blinked once. That verdict had been buried under court motions and bureaucratic silence. I hadn't heard anyone bring it up in months. "I'm studying law now," they added, smiling wide. "Because of you." That's all they said before turning and slipping back inside. Sometimes the real applause finds you outside the room. I stood still for a long moment, letting the weight of that land where nothing else ever had. Not from Vernon, not from Isolde, not even from Marlene. And yet, it was enough. There would be no formal apology. Vernon wouldn't chase me down. Isolde wouldn't shatter. Marlene would never say the words I once ached to hear. But they didn't own this ending. They didn't get to write the last line. I walked toward the parking lot slowly, hands free, heels clicking against uneven stone. My phone buzzed in my purse. I didn't look right away. At my car, I opened the door and set my clutch down, reaching for my flats, then paused. I took off the heels entirely and placed them in the passenger seat. I'd had enough of high ground built on discomfort. Driving barefoot felt honest. At the next red light, I pulled out my phone and opened a message thread. An unsent text to Vernon I drafted a dozen times over the last year. This one said, "I saw what you didn't say." I hovered over it. Then I deleted it. Next, I closed the browser tab I'd left open with the Hartman estate filings. For years, I'd checked it like a scar, curious if my name might reappear somewhere. It hadn't. It wouldn't. I opened my email and typed quickly, easily, confirming my acceptance for the guest lecturer position. I'd be honored to speak to your incoming law students. I hit send before I could second-guess it. I wasn't asking for a seat at their table anymore. I was designing my own. On the drive home, I didn't take the highway. I took the slow road through the old district, past the first legal clinic I worked in, the apartment I once shared with 3 interns, the courthouse where I defended my first tenant against an illegal eviction. That night, I slept better than I had in years, because I wasn't waiting for permission to feel proud anymore. They hadn't given me my dignity, so they couldn't take it back. When I woke up, I made coffee. I ignored my inbox for once. Instead, I drafted a talk titled "The Law of Unseen Labor." I smiled at the irony. Just before noon, I got an email from the program coordinator. "Your topic was perfect. Thank you again, Professor Hartman." I'd never been called that before, but it fit. That evening, I pulled into the same parking spot outside my apartment. I unlocked the door, set down my bag, and exhaled. They won't remember the details of tonight, but I will, because it's where I stopped needing them to. And somewhere, someone was waiting to thank me not for who I was, but who I'd become. The sun hadn't quite cleared the rooftops yet. It was the kind of morning that smelled like something new. Wet concrete, dew on wood, steam from the first cup of coffee. I sat on the porch of my own home, barefoot, one leg tucked under the other, a mug in my hand and my laptop open beside me. My heels from last night rested by the door, as silent as the people I'd left behind. I reached for the envelope. It had been tucked in the back of my dresser for years, creases worn, ink slightly faded. A note Vernon had written after I passed the bar. One of the only handwritten things I ever received from him. I used to hold it like a promise. Today, I held it like a relic. "You were always meant to stand taller than their expectations." I read it aloud, not for myself this time, but for the mic clipped to my blouse. "Welcome to the first episode of Legal Legacies, the stories we rewrite." That was the name of the podcast. Not clever, not dramatic, just true. And in this house, truth didn't ask to be polished. It just asked to be said. The screensaver flickered on. I closed the laptop and leaned back into my chair. My phone buzzed again. A notification from the local news. Aelith Hartman joins Housing Equity Reform Advisory. My name beside a senator's in bold. They tried to bury me in silence. I built a stage from the silence instead. 2 days later, I stood behind a podium at a nonprofit gala, the same one Isolde had once headlined. This time, my name was on the banner. A photo of me giving the keynote was posted within the hour. The comments poured in. "She's what law should look like." Finally, someone who's earned her seat. I didn't smile at the applause. I smiled because I didn't need it. Then the dominoes fell. Isolde was removed from a board she once boasted about, quietly. No press release, just her name omitted from the next email. Vernon's PR consultant resigned. Something about reputational conflict. A polite way to say, this brand is no longer clean. A week later, a cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. Marlene's handwriting. Inside, a birthday card. It read, "I hope you're well." No apology, no acknowledgement. I slid it into the recycling bin without opening the flap all the way. Some ghosts don't deserve resurrection. Back in my home office, I opened a document titled, Power of Attorney, Personal Use Only. I typed in my full name. No witnesses needed. No one else required. I named myself the sole executor of my living trust. I was my own legacy now. Success doesn't ask for permission. It signs its own damn paperwork. That night, I walked alone to a rooftop bar. No event, no dress code, just the skyline stretched out like a welcome mat I'd finally earned. I ordered 1 glass of Prosecco, sat near the edge, and lifted it slowly. To the girl they forgot, I said quietly, and the woman they can't ignore. I took a sip. The bubbles stung just right. They called me a maid, but I cleaned house and kept the deed.